So people are joining us now. If you want to put your location in the chat box to share with us where you're from, that would be fantastic. We're expecting quite a few participants, so we're going to give a little bit of time to see. We have somebody from Memphis, Tennessee, somebody from West Windsor, New Jersey. I'm in St. George, Utah. We have New Hampshire, Rio de Janeiro, Johannesburg. Well, this is very intimidating to see all this. We have Toronto, we have Oregon. We have somebody who can't see us, Sarah. Sarah is our tech person for today, and so she might be able to help out with that. We have Oakland, California. We have Massachusetts. We have, again, Toronto, Vermont, let's see. Melbourne, Australia, Ireland. That is fantastic. So we do have a tech person online with us who is Sarah, who is going to kind of monitor the chat as we go along to see if anybody needs any technical support. And then we also have a Q&A area that will be, it's kind of down on the same screen as your chat where you can ask questions, and hopefully we will get to those. We have people from Sweden, from Massachusetts, it goes very quickly, from Denver, from Brazil, from Italy. I feel like I'm traveling the world right now. What a nice feeling that is after being at home for so long. So we have about 154 people online. I think we'll give it another minute or two and then we'll get started. There's Kathy. Hi, Kathy. From Portland, from Philadelphia, the Philippines. Today we are going to be talking about communication. And as we start, I'm going to introduce myself and talk a teeny bit about the current climate going on in the United States. And then we're going to get into the intro. So looks like we're all here. So my name is Gwen Hurd, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I was first introduced to the IFS model through my graduate school training in the mid-90s. There was a paragraph in a book that we had read in, I think, our family systems course. And I was really attached to and attracted to the way that Dick spoke about parts. I was working with adolescents at the time, and the idea of parts really gave them permission to be in their feelings, to both love and hate their parents at the same time. In 2000, I was able to finish a 2-year IFS, what would become the level 1 training. It was one Friday a month for 2 years with Dick as the head trainer. We would go and gather together, learn IFS, and then go back and practice it. I currently live in St. George, Utah. I'm a IFS Certified Therapist and a clinical consultant, which means that I work with therapists who have finished their level 1 training and are wanting hours towards their credentialing in IFS. So I wanted to kind of speak a little bit too. I'm going to read this statement off of what I wrote so I get it right. So I wanted to speak to the fact that as we start today, I want to acknowledge that the title of the workshop, I Want to Scream, was imagined months ago during the midst of quarantine. Yet in many ways, this has taken on a different meaning in the last week. I recognize that George Floyd's murder is not the first to cause a need for outcry, protest, and change in the United States. In fact, the systemic racism in this country has been occurring since June 1619, when the first ship carrying slaves landed on our shores. Since 1619, there has been a need to scream to address the injustice that has impacted Black and Brown Americans. Indeed, it is white people, such as myself, who need to stand up and hold ourselves accountable to understanding both the current pain and the cultural and legacy burdens we have created in our treatment of people of color, both individually, but mostly in our country through institutional and systemic racism. We white people first need to find ways to take care of our own parts that get triggered or hurt during conversations about race due to our white fragility. There are tons of books written by many people that address white fragility, white privilege, how to talk about race. Another place to access resources to find self-led conversation about race is the Facebook community page, the IFS Facebook community page. Sarah is going to put that in the chat if anybody's interested. So I just want to acknowledge that the title of the seminar has a different meaning today, very specifically, but again, also kind of since 1619 could be applied. I've always appreciated IFS, the model. I learned it very early in my career, and it's been very helpful on a personal and professional level. So with that all being said, today, the goal of our workshop is to support all of us in maintaining self-led conversations. That may be hard from the beginning or may create triggers based on our parts getting activated during the conversations. I've created the steps of our time together. My vision, again, when I created the steps of our time together, my vision and focus were on communication in this time of being with our families, friends, and loved ones in close quarters over weeks and months. I invite you to take what resonates today and to leave what doesn't. These are my thoughts and my words. There is a slide that will specifically teach and speak to some things in the IFS manual, and I point that out. I really appreciate you being here with me. And again, just to remind you before we start, there is the chat where you all can chat to each other. And then there's the Q&A, which is the question and answer. I'm gonna think that this is to everybody else. I'm gonna ask if Sarah, there's anything on the chat that I need to be aware of, if you can put the Q&A. So the IFS manual I'm referring to is the 2020 manual. And so that's information you can find on the IFS website. So we're gonna start today with a meditation. So if everybody wants to take a breath and get comfortable, close your eyes if that feels appropriate to you. And the meditation is called What If? So imagine yourself getting ready to interact with someone you need to have a difficult conversation with. Whether it's someone you live with and love, your significant other, parent, sibling, or child, or someone less emotionally intimate, such as a roommate or a friend, or even someone you feel has say over you, such as your supervisor or boss. Feel into this moment of knowing you need to speak and listen. As you feel into this moment, you may feel frustration, fear, anger, and other parts due to the impending conversation. Ask yourself, what if I could stay calm? What if I could come from curiosity? What if I could come from compassion? What if I could stay focused on connection? What if I could honor the courage it takes to be in this conversation? What if I could stay clear in my intention? What if I made every attempt to get my interfering parts to step back by noticing, acknowledging, and agreeing to attend to them another time? And what if those parts knew and trusted I would allow myself this time in the future for self to be with them? Now go back to seeing yourself getting ready for this conversation. Notice how it feels inside. And when you're ready, you can bring your attention back to our time together. So I have a PowerPoint that we're going to share and talk through some points of how I have experienced COVID impacting the clients in my practice, obviously the people in my life. Currently, I'm in a training in IFS Level 1 training as an assistant trainer mentee. So taking kind of all of the broad view from the people that I've interacted with, we're going to speak to some of the things regarding communication and COVID. And we'll go ahead and have the presentation pulled up now and have Sarah share the screen. Perfect. All right. Someone asked if I could share the meditation. I can go ahead and email that to Sarah at some point without a problem. And then hopefully she can share. Or maybe I can download it. But remind me before we end about that. So, Sarah, I guess I should have asked you if I can switch the page or if I need you to switch. So I'm just going to say switch and see what happens. Perfect. Okay. So again, looking at the different ways, you can switch it. Perfect. So the different ways people have been experiencing social distance or self-isolation during quarantine. So in my experience, there has been fear for people's health, or if you can go, yeah, just stay and I'll let you know when to switch. People have been afraid for their health or another person's health, whether it's due to their age, whether it's due to any kind of medically compromised underlying conditions they have, whether it's just due to being worried about being sick. Financial fears my clients have had. What is this going to mean if they're out of work? What is this going to mean for their businesses? What is this going to mean for their families? Depression caused by isolation. I have some clients who are relieved to having permission to stay home and isolate, as they're introverts and sometimes being outside in our world is really difficult for them. I have clients who have anxiety about not knowing who to believe as far as the information that we're getting regarding COVID, and what are the best ways to keep ourselves safe. And frankly, some people are wondering if it's even real. So you can switch. I have clients who are frustrated with everyone being in the house. They love their families, they love their friends, and yet they feel like they're just walking all over each other. And that's creating a lot of conflict and anxiety. Some people are relieved from a very previously chaotic life and have a desire to change how they were living once they get back to normal activities. Clients who have a fear about having to go to work due to being essential workers and what that means for their families when they come home, and clients who are angry about having to go to work. Switch. So for some people too, so if we look at the dynamics of the environment, for some people, this time is creating connection. I have couples and families that are spending time together, playing together. In my own family, not having to get up at 6:30 in the morning to get my children to school has been a blessing. There are other families that are finding it difficult to not judge the people in their lives for what they're doing during this time, not knowing whether the person on the computer is playing a video game or doing work or scrolling Facebook. Having people's own feelings of frustration kind of lead to them, again, looking at others for cures, which is what we'll be talking about. I have clients speaking of being frustrated that they no longer have a moment to themselves. Clients difficult balancing parenting and teaching children. It's very difficult to teach children, especially of your own school anxieties and own negative school experiences. I work with a lot of people who struggle with math, and the idea of teaching their elementary school students or middle school students math creates a lot of insecurities and anxieties for them. And then those parts tend to lead how they're showing up in their lives. Next. So parts, I believe that everyone's pretty familiar with what parts are. And I'm going to go ahead and read the paragraph that is from Schwartz and Sweezy, 2019, but it's in the manual that I mentioned. Parts are discrete, autonomous mental systems, each with their own idiosyncratic range of emotion, style of expressions, abilities, desires, and views of the world. For example, a part who is angry can also feel hurt or scared. If we just see it as the angry part, we are likely to ignore its other feelings. If, on the other hand, we view it as an angry person, often a child or teenager, we are more likely to be interested in its full range of emotion and its potential to shift between feeling states. So when we think about parts, we're thinking about them as discrete people inside of ourselves, internal family systems, the family that lives inside of us. And how do we know when a part is signaling their presence? Some of the ways are thoughts, feelings, sensations, memories, inner voices, words, images, dreams, physical symptoms, and felt sense. Anything that is constantly not with you, anytime that you recognize a shift, might be a part trying to get your attention. And I think, as most of you know, there are 3 roles of parts. We have the managers, whose motto is never again. This pain, this feeling, whatever is happening now, we will never allow to happen again. I think about them like the sentries that are on the mountaintop, looking at a landmine, looking at a field of landmines and memorizing where each of those mines are so they can help you negotiate through that landmine without being hurt. Firefighters, their motto is when all else fails. So when a landmine is hit, the firefighter is going to come in to assess the damage. And exiles, don't forget about me, is their motto. Exiles are mostly these childlike parts that have felt vulnerable as we've shown up in the world, and that vulnerability hasn't felt safe to us. So our managers and firefighters are doing their best to protect us from these vulnerabilities of our exiles. See that Anne asked if we could share the PowerPoint. Sarah does have that, so she can send that out for sure. And then we will go ahead and go to the next slide. So getting our parts needs met. We want to think about how to speak for a part rather than from the part. So if I'm speaking for a part, and I'm speaking for all of that energy that's in me, it generally looks loud. It can look aggressive. It can look forceful. It can look painful. I can be flooded with the emotion of that part. I might be sobbing. My ability to communicate is at times rather stifled because I'm so flooded with that part. So speaking for a part is that part trying to get its needs met outside of me, trying to advocate for my system or drive my bus. I talk a lot to my clients about who's driving your bus. And I ask them to actually imagine a 5-year-old. If a 5-year-old was actually literally driving a school bus, what would that look like? I ask my clients, would that be safe? And mostly they say no. And is it unsafe due to that 5-year-old being a problem? Or is it unsafe due to that 5-year-old not having the same ability to drive a bus? They don't know the rules of the road. They can't reach the pedals. They might not know which pedals are which. They might not be able to see over the steering wheel. But if that 5-year-old in your system believes that they are the only person that can solve the problem, or the only person that has the ability to recognize and address what's going on, they will drive the bus. So speaking for the part would be allowing that 5-year-old to continue driving the bus. And when I recognize when my 5-year-old is driving the bus, if I can simply have that 5-year-old sit in the passenger seat, and my 52-year-old, or my client's 16-year-old, or my client's 10-year-old, my client's self, my client's part that has the skill set. Obviously, a 10-year-old can't drive, but I think you understand what I mean. Who has the skill? How to bring the self of the client to drive the bus so that 5-year-old can be in the passenger seat and be taken care of or advocated for. So speaking for a part is my 5-year-old driving the bus, trying to manage what's going on. Speaking from the part is my self-energy, my 52-year-old sitting in the driver's seat, advocating for my 5-year-old part. When I advocate for a part, it sounds much differently. A part of me is feeling angry. A part of me is feeling afraid. A part of me is feeling scared. It does two things. It allows me to take a breath and recognize that this is not all of who I am. It allows my clients to recognize that the feeling they're having is not all of who they are. And it allows them to see some ways they can advocate for their part. So when advocating for our part, the question becomes, who is responsible for our parts? My understanding is that I am primarily responsible for my system and my parts. It's my job to connect with them, help them feel less afraid, help them feel heard. And it is my partner's secondary. They might be a secondary caretaker of my parts. They might be somebody who can help balance in a therapy session. I'm working with my clients to learn to be their primary caretaker of their parts while holding space in the session and keeping some gentle holding so they know that their parts are safe, but teaching them how to interact with their parts because they're who leaves the session. I'm going to take a look at this chat because I see there's a question. So hold on a second, making sure that I'm being clear. So I might have said this incorrectly, which is totally fine. So thank you, Julie, for pointing that out. I might have absolutely said, speaking for a part, you're correct, so speaking from the part is when my 5-year-old is driving the bus. And speaking for the part is when my 5-year-old is in the passenger seat. So I apologize for that confusion. I very much appreciate you pointing that out, that I switched those around. So again, yes, speaking from the part is where all the emotion and energy is going to come from, versus speaking for the part, which is where I am speaking for the part of me that needs support. So that was great. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you pointing that out to me. So who is responsible for our parts? So to the best of my ability, again, I am responsible for my parts. My clients are responsible for their parts. And there are some people in my life who can be secondary, who can help me with my parts when they're in a good space, who can offer me self-led love and compassion. In my office as a therapist, I am in that role of offering my client space to work with their parts, holding safety and support while they're learning how to work with their own parts and getting their own parts needs met. So as a therapist, I'm not always with that client. So if I was responsible for that part, their parts, that doesn't really help them when they leave my office. So helping my clients see that they can be responsible for their parts, that they can take care of their parts, that they can separate and be with their parts, unblend from their parts, gives them a sense of clarity and responsibility, and they have more control over making that shift from being in the part, speaking from the part, or being with the part, speaking for the part. There's also a concept of U-turns. So in relationship, And even in a clinical setting, there are sometimes I have clients who want to know what I think, or want to know if I feel like something that happened to them is okay or not okay. And I recognize, again, when my clients are seeking my truth instead of their own truth, that a U-turn is really important, that part that really needs reassurance, if my client can be there with that part feels the connection of my client's self with them, then they leave with that self energy. They leave with that ability to make that U-turn to take care of their own needs. In relationship, when I do couples therapy, there are times one member of the couple, hold on a second, somehow I lost my clock, okay. There are times one member of the couple has a part that really wants the other person to change, really wants the other person to do something different, really wants the other person to hear them. And sometimes that part is coming from a very young place in the client, and their partner doesn't have the skill set to be present. So again, that U-turn, who needs to take care of the part? If my 5-year-old is driving my emotional bus, for me to be the one to connect with and take care of that part, for me to be the one that does that U-turn, that allows that 5-year-old to not be in front of me seeking support from other people, but to be turned towards me so I can take care of it. And we'll talk a little bit about these things with some examples. I'm going to go to the questions for a second to see. Okay. So, again, I apologize for the confusion. So yes, we want to speak for parts, not from the part. So hopefully that's clear, that we want to speak for the part as a way of advocating for the part, as a way of taking care of ourselves, versus from the part that has all of the charge, all of the energy. Okay, so I'm going to come back to this other question and kind of stay on track a little bit while I think about the best way of answering that. So if we can go to the next slide. Oh, I see, I can move it. I lost it. Sorry, Sarah. Okay. So let's come back to, we're going to go through some examples. So let's come back to me. Let's stop sharing screen. Okay. So as far as how this seems to be working out in my office again, one of the things that in some of the couples that I work with, there are certain words that people understand from their life experience. And one of the things that, for instance, is one couple I've worked with, the word ritual has been a huge conflict. So one of the people in the couple grew up with rituals in their family of having meals together, having a Sunday meal. So a ritual in their family was having a Sunday meal. The other client grew up with some ritual abuse. So the word ritual is very traumatic and triggering. So these clients are in their 70s. These experiences they had were from childhood. The one client who has seen the word ritual used as a positive family gathering is really confused why the other client responds from such a panic way and shuts down and the communication ends. So in that moment, sometimes what can happen is our parts get activated. So one client is traumatized and shut down. The other client is confused about why his partner has shut down. And in that moment, if we can go into those eight C's and specifically come from curiosity. If I'm communicating with somebody and there's confusion, if I can come to that confusion with curiosity, if I can come to that confusion recognizing okay, I'm not quite understanding why this person is responding that way. So I want to slow it down, and I want to see if I can remain curious. So if there are parts of me that are anxious, parts of me that are in fear, parts of me that are worried, again, the U-turn, if I can turn those parts towards me and hold them while I get curious about my partner's response or reaction. So curiosity, when it comes to communication, oftentimes when I'm working with couples, they'll speak about confusion. I was really confused. I didn't understand what was going on. And that is usually a huge indicator that there is a miscommunication going on. So for example, in this client, couple's case with the word ritual. So in my office, we were able to slow down that communication and recognize that that word was very triggering and traumatizing to a member of the couple. So we worked with the parts of the person who is triggered and traumatized by that word. We had her do some individual work with the parts of her that were activated to turn them towards her, to help her with her self-energy towards those parts, to help calm those parts, for them to understand that she's taking care of them, that she's survived everything she's been through, and at 76, her world is safe. So she was the primary caretaker of those parts, right? And then working with her husband to recognize where his parts got activated due to the communication with his wife and where it got stuck. And then they were able to speak in a different way, using different language to meet their goal of having some patterns of behaviors, such as a family dinner on a Saturday night. But again, check. Okay, so again, we're looking at U-turns. And I think it's helpful to have a visual. I tend to use my hands a lot. So there are times when I'm working with a client and their part, you can feel it. You can feel it literally in front of them. And again, if you look at a part as a person, and a childlike part is activated, a fearful part is activated so maybe the part that wants to know I'm okay and I'm valuable, right? So if my part that wants to know I'm okay and I'm valuable is out here seeking from people outside of me, am I okay or am I valuable? That's not going to be safe, because there might be people in my life who are very self-led, who can see this part of me and connect with this part of me. But there's also people in my life who are going to have their own parts activated. So if I can breathe bigger into my self-energy, remember my self-energy, and I can turn that part towards me, so I can take care of the part of me that needs to know it's valuable. I can take care of the part of me that's feeling afraid. And then if there's something I need from my partner, as far as if there is a behavior or if there is something going on in our relationship that is making me feel not valuable at 52, I can speak to it differently because I've taken the charge out. It's no longer my 10-year-old child that's seeking my partner's approval, wanting my partner to make it better. I've taken care of that 10-year-old. I've done a U-turn. So this is a U-turn. I've done a U-turn and I'm taking care of that 10-year-old. So my 52-year-old self can speak to anything in 2020 that we need to work on, that maybe would be good to do different. So again, so what I'm saying individually, if my part is triggered out here, looking for someone else to fix it, it makes much more sense to me in my practice to do a U-turn, to take care of that charge. Usually if I'm charged because there is a younger part of me that's activated. Something that's not going on in 2020, but feels familiar is activated. So I'm taking care of that charge, and then I'm advocating for the part and myself in 2020. So hopefully that answered, let's do this question. I think they answered that question. Oop. And then the next question, again, about clarifying for U-turns, was about, the question is, are you saying the client is to find assurance within, not from the therapist? Again, as a U-turn. So when I am working with a client and they have a part that shows up in my office and seeking my reassurance, seeking my approval, I tend to turn that part, work with that client to unblend from the part. So the client can be with their part. The client can turn that part towards them. So I'm not going to do that if my client is in an extreme state. I'm obviously going to lead them through the steps of IFS, as far as unblending and befriending and doing all of the process of IFS therapy. Some of my clients that I've worked with for a while kind of have shorthand. And so if their energy when they come into my office is anxious and well, what do you think? And how do you feel? And if you had this going on, what would you do? When they're seeking something from me, and this is a client who has had a lot of experience being self-led and know how it feels in their body when they are self-led. If I just gently point out, it feels like there's a part that really wants my reassurance, the client then can turn that part towards them and they can give that part reassurance. One of the reasons why, to me, that's a priority in my office is because I want my clients to be able to do that outside of my office. If they can recognize when that reassurance is needed, and they can unblend from that part and then connect and take care of that part outside of my office, they tend to be able to make more self-led decisions. I'm going to look at the chat again. I think that's put that done. And then I think this one is done too. Let's see. Okay, that's in. Yes, so Hope says very succinctly, thank you, Hope. So the client's authentic self takes care of the younger part. Exactly. So I'm having the client do a U-turn when I feel that part's energy leaning into myself, having the client do a U-turn. So that client's authentic self can take care of that part. And again, these are with clients who really know what that feels like, have really had moments where they've accessed their authentic self. And so they can feel, if I just ask them if that's a part, they can feel that energy in their body and can then take care of it. Okay, so somebody is asking if I can demonstrate how to unblend, and what does self-part reassurance sound look like? Okay, so let me think for a second. So if I'm working with a couple, so obviously in the time of COVID, I've worked with some couples who have very different approaches to how to negotiate what is going on. I have quite a few clients who might make comments like, I don't care if I get it. And their partners get really triggered by that because what their partners are hearing is, you want to die. You don't care if you die. You don't care if you leave me. So in that situation, we're going to slow, as you can imagine, that conversation escalates pretty quickly and gets charged pretty quickly. So when that's brought to my office, if we can slow that conversation down and each person have an opportunity to unblend. So for instance, the person who is saying, I don't care if I get COVID, that part, that is in front of them making that statement. For one of my clients, that part was feeling really frustrated. That part was feeling really overwhelmed. That part was feeling controlled. That part was feeling just very backed into a corner. And so when we were able to unblend to talk about how that part of them, the part of them that is saying, I don't care if I get COVID, like, what does that mean? What is that part saying? So that part that's feeling very stuck and very frustrated, when my client can unblend from that part by feeling where the energy is in or around their body. They might, again, feel it as a voice in their head. They might feel it as tension in their chest, but getting them to tune into where that statement is coming from, where the energy is coming from, and then asking them how they feel towards that energy. So that allows them to separate. So in this particular case, my client was able to say, well, I understand. I feel compassion for the energy. I understand why that part feels so stuck. Once the client was able to unblend from that part, the client was able to clarify, like, from the place of their authentic self, they fully intend to take whatever precautions are necessary to not get sick. What their partner was hearing is, I don't care if I get sick, I'm going to go out and get sick. But as we slow down the conversation, as this client unblended from that part, the client's authentic self was very clear. I don't intend to do anything dangerous. I don't intend to put myself in harm's way in a purposeful way. I have a part that is feeling frustrated by the situation. So that unblending and clarification, as you could imagine, was very helpful for the other partner who was hearing, you just want to die. And so the other partner is able to feel the part of them, the part in their stomach, the part in their gut, when they were hearing this part say, I don't care if I get COVID. That energy hit them in their gut. Oh my God, you're going to die. I'm going to live without you, right? So the other partner was able to find that energy in their system, was able to breathe a little bigger than that energy, ask themselves, how do I feel towards that energy? Best way to connect with self is to look at how you feel towards a part, to connect with a part, because you can see that energy is separate. You can feel the charge differently. So as far as unblending, so unblending is giving us space in our system to be with a part, to get to know that part, and take care of that part. And so the second part of that question was self-to-part reassurance. So the client who was saying, I don't care if I get COVID. So the self energy, the authentic self, when it was connecting, the client was connecting to this part, was able to really say, I understand. I understand how this feels scary. I understand how we don't really know what's right or wrong based on this client's information. And I have you. I have you. You don't have to make this decision. This part, this young, anxious part that was feeling closed in and threatened and all of this energy towards these rules, the client self was able to reassure this part. It's okay. We're still an adult in 2020. We're going to take this information in and make the best decisions that we can. But you're not doing that alone. So there is the self-to-part reassurance, and then the other partner, when he was able to hear his wife say, I don't want to die. I am going to pay attention and take precautions. I just am feeling overwhelmed by all of the right and wrong of it. He was also, like I said, able to touch base with the part of him that was afraid he was going to lose his wife and unblend with that part, give it self-compassion, and help update it that, okay, let's really hear what she's saying. She's not saying that she's going to be dangerous. She's not saying that she's not going to be careful. And so they were able to renegotiate their conversation in a way from a self-led place instead of from a parts place. Okay, I'm going to go back to okay. Some of these questions I think are kind of broader for either IFS. So for instance, how can I get information regarding OCD in IFS? I would think that I maybe ask Sarah. I'm thinking that I would start kind of with the Institute. There's some great books on IFS that are available at the bookstore that speak about internal family systems and how to connect with those parts, go through the framework of the model. Also, I think we did this. Let me just see what this shows. So someone posted a question earlier that I really appreciate, and I feel like getting into it would be completely off topic. So it's not my intention to ignore the question. It says, you're saying clients are anxious about their health. Isn't this kind of communication minimizing and denying the underlying death, anxiety, and terror that are stirred up in the unconsciousness? So when I'm speaking about that, again, I'm looking at it right now in the framework of communication. So for example, I have some clients in a family that have some very different charged fears, valid fears regarding COVID. However, those fears are they feel are very juxtaposed and polarized. So helping those clients unblend from their parts, the part that feels charged, the part that feels fearful, the part that is trying again to drive the bus, the 5-year-old driving the bus in a state of panic, right? If you have 2 5-year-olds driving a bus in communication, we're going to for sure have a crash. So one of the things I'm doing as far as my job is helping clients unblend, having that 5-year-old be with them, having that 5-year-old be in the passenger seat so those adults can communicate. And those 2 5-year-olds are not going to be, their needs are not going to be met by the other adult because the situations and the belief systems are so radically different. But if those 5-year-olds are met by each individual adult, then those 2 adults are relating to each other very differently. They might still have a different opinion. It might still be polarized. However, the extreme nature of the argument is going to look different. Again, specifically, how does one unblend? So there's many different techniques to unblend. And there is the IFS, I think that Sarah can post in the IFS website. There is a bookstore that has many different manuals on IFS. So one of the ways that I help my clients unblend is notice where the part is. We could just try this for a second. So let's go back to the meditation. And you're thinking about someone you need to speak to. You're thinking about walking into that conversation that is anxiety producing for you. And when you think about that conversation, feel into your system. Is there a voice in your head telling you it's unsafe, telling you that person's going to be mad? Is there a beating in your chest? Are your palms sweaty? What is going on inside that gives you a sense of discomfort, gives you a sense of energy? And if you tune into that, so for me, it might be a pounding in my chest. So if I tune into that pounding in my chest, that in and of itself creates some space, creates some unblending. So instead of all of me being pounding, which is maybe how I felt before I recognized the pounding in my chest, I'm no longer flooded. I've isolated. I can feel into the part. And as a therapist, I would ask the client, how do you feel towards that part? And I would work with them. If they said, well, I'm angry at that part, I wish it wasn't there, I would ask the angry part if it could give us some space. So if the angry part has some space here, how do you feel towards this part in your chest? And unblending is kind of unpacking all of the parts that get in the way of being present with this pounding in my chest. So once I come to a calm or a curiosity or clarity or feeling connected, once that authentic self energy is able to be with this part, I would continue the work of IFS. But unblending is how I, in my system, bring my self energy to that part, bring myself to that part. How do I feel into that part? So it's not all of what I'm feeling, but this energy. So let's say that this part of me is saying, the last time I tried to talk to this person, they got mad and yelled. You know, I might say in my mind or as a therapist, do you remember the first time that someone yelled at you when you tried to speak? And again, I would go in and work with that part with I think it's the 6 Fs. It might be 5. So I would work with the IFS model. Okay, let's look at. Can you, let's see where that one question went. I'm sorry, I just lost a question. So let me get back in here. Can you please share more about clues the client may give when they are unblending? Okay, so again, I'm looking for more clues now that my clients and I are connecting over technology, really fair. And so I think you'll notice their tone of voice. So obviously, just taking this webinar as an example, right? So my tone of voice probably at the beginning was a little bit more pressured. I was a little bit more anxious. So you probably noticed a shift in my energy. That's one of the shifts I might be looking for with my client. You know, how is their tone? Where are they making eye contact? Also, how they feel towards the part ultimately is the sign of unblending. If I'm angry at the part, if I'm scared of the part, anything that is not one of the 8 Fs indicates that there's another part in the way of authentic self to this part. So when we're looking to unblend, we're really looking to cue into the answer of how do I feel towards that part? Okay. Let's see. Thank you, Julie. That's very nice. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I've answered all of these, at least to the best of my ability right now. Is there a difference between client part seeking your assurance and a client's genuine curiosity about your perspective, opinion, experience? So absolutely. In my practice, there's definitely a different energy. When I have a built relationship with a client or even kind of a parts detector inside, I might even ask, so what are you hoping will happen if I respond to that question? Or I might say, can you check in to see where that question's coming from? And again, my client might say, oh yeah, I just really wanted to know because I was feeling really anxious. Or my client might say, gosh, I just feel really curious. Like I don't know if I'm in this alone, right? So again, feeling into where that question is coming from, asking the client to check in. The client is the expert. So if you check in with your system to connect with where that question's coming from, that's going to let me know kind of how I want to approach the client. And even with communication, right? What is my goal in communication? What am I seeking from the other person? And is it realistic? Is what I'm seeking from the other person something that makes sense in 2020 that I should be seeking from them? Or is it based on a part of me that's charged or afraid, and that part that needs self-connection? So if I'm self-connected in communication and working with my partner, it's going to look different than if I'm triggered and working from parts, right? So again, if my 5-year-old's driving my bus and my partner's 14-year-old's driving their bus, it's probably not going to go very well. I want to take care of my 5-year-old, so I at 52 can interact to the best of my ability with my partner. And if I get confused, if I don't understand why they're responding that way, if I tell them, hey, you look beautiful today, and they get angry, instead of getting triggered into a fight, I might slow down. I might connect with my self energy and ask them, help me understand what just happened. I'm really curious. I felt like I was giving you a compliment and it sounds like it felt really hurtful. Can you tell me more about that? So when I work with couples, when I work with clients who are struggling with communication, one of the cues that we do is if you are confused, you want to slow down and get curious. Instead of reacting from the confusion, you want to interact from curiosity. I very much appreciate everyone's time. I hope that you got something out of this. Like I said, please take what fits, leave what doesn't. And I think we got, and again, on the IFS Institute website, make sure to go to the bookstore because it has lots of great books about IFS. Let's see, I hope there weren't any questions on the chat. Okay, really quick. Jean's asked a question. I don't think they'll cut me off right away. Let me answer this question and then we'll go. Sometimes when doing a U-turn with one partner, he or she may get emotional and the session can be on that person. Once on that person, I get uncomfortable. The partner may seem annoyed. Perfect. So this person's saying, when I'm working with a couple and I start focusing on one person and their parts, I worry about how the other partner is managing it. So when I work with couples, we have an understanding that during a session, we might need to focus on one person in the couple. And I ask that the other person do their best to stay in self-energy, do their best to pay attention to their parts. So if their bus can be full, their bus can be full during their partner session, but if they're self-led, they're holding energy in the room for me to work with their partner. And generally what happens is when you see a shift occur, when you see your partner take care of their own 5-year-old, so the charge in 2020 is taken out of the situation, there generally is gratitude for the work. I try to pay attention to not focus on the same person every time and kind of come back to how did you experience your partner's work? And again, from a self-led place. But in my experience, when I'm doing couples work, even if one is doing some individual work in the session, working towards that U-turn to connect with a part, the other partner feels relieved because then they're back to working with the 52-year-old, their 52-year-old spouse instead of the 5-year-old. So there's a great book on U-turns called You Are the One You're Waiting For. It's a fantastic book by Richard Schwartz. I'd really recommend that to anyone doing couples therapy. And there's some very specific couples therapy training that IFS does. So thank you. I appreciate your time.